always thought the house on Maple Ridge Lane would be mine someday, not because I felt entitled to it, but because I earned it. When Dad lost his job during my sophomore year of college, I was the one who picked up extra shifts at the diner. I sent money home so the mortgage wouldn't fall behind. Mom cried when I paid the property taxes that year. "You're our responsible one," she said, squeezing my hand. "We'll never forget this." That sentence, "we'll never forget this," stuck with me. I held on to it the way kids cling to bedtime promises. But 12 years later, standing in the same kitchen where I used to do my homework, I realized they'd forgotten everything. Mom sat at the table with a cup of tea, her voice careful, rehearsed. "Claire, we've been thinking about the future. Your father and I are getting older, and it's time to simplify. The house is too big for us." I smiled faintly. "Makes sense. Downsizing could be nice." Dad cleared his throat. "Well, actually, we've decided to transfer the house to Emily." At first, I thought I misheard him. "To Emily?" Mom nodded, almost too quickly. "Yes, sweetheart. She's been having a hard time finding stability, and this could really help her get back on her feet." My stomach sank. "Wait, what about selling it and splitting it equally? Or keeping it in the family for all of us?" "Claire," Mom said softly, like I was overreacting. "You already have your own apartment. You're doing so well. You don't need this house." I couldn't speak for a moment. That familiar ache, the one from childhood, crept up my throat. The same ache I used to feel when Emily got away with skipping curfew, while I was grounded for a week for coming home 5 minutes late. Dad tried to meet my eyes but couldn't. "It's not about fairness," he said, "it's about helping your sister." I laughed. It came out brittle. "It's always about helping Emily." That night, I sat in my car in front of the house, staring at the windows that still glowed with the same warm light I grew up under. Every memory felt like a small betrayal now: the Christmases I hosted, the weekends I came home to paint the guest room, the repairs I paid for, just until Dad's pension kicked in. And now, they were handing it all over. I texted my best friend, Ava. "Me, they're giving Emily the house." "Ava, the house? Like, the house you basically paid off." "Me, apparently, she needs it more." Ava, wow. Classic golden child treatment. I didn't even reply. Because deep down, I knew Ava was right. This wasn't new, it was just the final act in a play I'd been cast in since birth. Growing up, Emily and I were opposites. She was the dreamer, I was the planner. She'd blow her allowance in a week, I'd save mine for months. She dropped out of college twice, I graduated early. Our parents always said, "Emily just needs more help." And I gave it. I lent her money, let her crash on my couch, even co-signed a loan for her once, a mistake I still regret, but giving her the family home? That was something else entirely. I decided to confront them again a few days later, when emotions weren't so raw. I even rehearsed what I'd say, calm, logical, not dramatic. But the moment I walked into the living room, logic left the building. Emily was there, barefoot on the couch, scrolling her phone like she owned the place. "Oh, hey, sis," she said without looking up. "Mom told me you're upset. Don't worry, you'll always have a guest room here." A guest room? In the house I grew up in. Something inside me snapped quietly, like a rubber band stretched too far. "Emily," I said slowly, "you know I paid part of the down payment, right? That I've been covering taxes for years?" She shrugged. "Yeah, but you were helping Mom and Dad. They're the ones who gave me the house. So you're okay with taking it?" Her eyes finally lifted from the screen. "It's not like I asked for it." But she didn't refuse it either. I left that night without saying goodbye. Driving home, I felt numb, not furious, just hollow. That kind of betrayal doesn't ignite fire, it drains it. For the first time in my life, I didn't call to check in the next day. I didn't text, "Made it home safe." I didn't remind Dad about his doctor's appointment. Silence felt strange, but freeing. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Green, our old neighbor. "Claire, honey," he said gently, "I heard about the house. Your folks mentioned it while clearing out the garage. But something didn't sit right with me. There's a letter your dad asked me to hold years ago, said to give it to you when the time came." I hesitated. "What time?" He sighed. "Guess it's now." When the envelope arrived, I recognized my father's handwriting instantly. "Claire," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I finally told you about the house." My heart pounded. There's something I couldn't say out loud. "Your mother and I have been carrying a debt for years, one tied to your sister. We didn't want to burden you, not after how much you've already given. The house is meant to settle that debt. Please understand. This isn't about love or fairness. It's about cleaning up a mess we should have handled differently." I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. A debt tied to Emily? What did that even mean? I flipped the page, no signature, no detail, nothing else. Just a hollow explanation that left me with more questions than answers. The next morning, I drove to Maple Ridge Lane one last time. The "for sale" sign was gone. Emily's car was parked in the driveway. She was planting flowers by the mailbox, like she belonged there. She looked up as I approached. "Hey, want to see what I've done with the place?" "No," I said quietly. "I just came to get some answers." Her smile faltered. "About what?" "Dad's letter." She froze. "What letter?" I handed her the copy I'd made. Watching her eyes dart across the words was like watching a mask slip. "Emily," I said slowly, "what did you do?" She swallowed hard. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me." She hesitated, and for the first time in years, I saw guilt in her expression, not the shallow kind, but the kind that hides something big. "I can't," she said finally, voice shaking. "Ask Mom." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the letter on my kitchen table. The city lights outside flickered against the glass, reflecting a version of me I barely recognized, tired, betrayed, but oddly calm. Ava called. "You okay?" I laughed softly. "Define okay. Do you want me to come over?" "No. I think I just need to think." Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about revenge or fairness. I was thinking about truth. Whatever my parents had done, whatever debt they were hiding, I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about the years I'd spent trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. And something told me the truth would hurt more than losing any home ever could. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at my father's letter. The handwriting, so familiar and steady, made my stomach twist. A debt tied to Emily. What kind of debt could be so large that my parents would give away the one thing that held our family together? I knew my father's way of avoiding confrontation too well. He'd always choose silence over honesty. But silence was a luxury I could no longer afford. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I was going back to the house, one last time, not to beg, not to plead, but to get the truth. When I arrived, the air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and lilacs. The porch had been repainted, the cracks I'd filled years ago now hidden under Emily's bright new colors. It felt unfamiliar, like walking into a stranger's version of my own past. Mom opened the door, her eyes widening with surprise. "Claire, honey. We weren't expecting you. I need to talk to you. Now." She hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Dad sat reading the paper. "It's early, then wake him up." She sighed, defeated. "All right." When they both sat across from me, I placed the letter on the table like evidence in a trial. "I got this from Mr. Green," I said quietly. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about the debt?" Dad's hands trembled slightly. He looked at Mom, then back at me. "It wasn't supposed to come to you." "Well, it did. And I want the truth." He exhaled deeply, the sound heavy with years of guilt. "When Emily was 22, she got into trouble. She took out a loan in our name, without telling us. It was substantial." Mom's voice cracked. "We almost lost the house, Claire. Your father paid most of it back with his pension, and we refinanced what was left. But there were still complications." I felt my throat tighten. "So that's why I was paying the taxes? Why did you say you couldn't afford it anymore?" Dad nodded. "We didn't want to burden you with the details. You'd already done so much." I stared at them, disbelief flooding me. "You kept this from me for over a decade? You let me keep sending money while protecting her?" "Claire, please," Mom said softly. "We were trying to keep the family together." "By lying to me?" The room fell silent, the ticking clock loud enough to make my pulse quicken. Emily walked in halfway through the argument, wearing one of Dad's old sweaters and holding a mug of coffee. She froze when she saw the letter on the table. "Oh," she said, voice small. "You told her." I turned to her sharply. "You knew?" She didn't answer. "You forged their names on a loan, nearly got them evicted, and you didn't say a word while I worked 2 jobs to help them keep the house?" "Claire, I was young. I was desperate." "Desperate?" I laughed bitterly. "You were reckless." Her eyes welled up. "You don't understand what it's like to always be compared to you. You were perfect, Claire. Every time I failed, they'd say, 'Why can't you be more like your sister?' I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted something of my own." I stared at her, stunned. "So you stole it. And now you've been given it. Congratulations." "Claire," Mom started, but I cut her off. "No. You don't get to tell me to calm down. You both enabled her. You turned her mistakes into my responsibility. And now you're rewarding her with the home I worked to save." Dad buried his face in his hands. "I know we failed you. But we thought this was the only way to finally close that chapter." "It's not closed," I said quietly. "It's wide open, and I'm finally seeing it for what it is." That evening, I drove straight to the lake a few miles away from the house. The sky was dimming, the water catching the last streaks of orange and pink. It was where I used to come as a teenager to clear my head. I sat on the dock and pulled out my phone. Ava had texted. Ava, you find out what happened? Me, yeah. Emily forged their name. They almost lost everything. Ava, holy, Claire, that's criminal. Me, yeah, but they covered for her. And now she gets the reward. Ava, what are you going to do? Me, I don't know. But I'm done being the responsible one who fixes everyone's mess. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. Somewhere in that quiet, something shifted inside me. I realized I'd been living my life as their insurance policy, always the safety net, never the child. And I was done. A week later, I received an email from a real estate agent. Subject, property transfer finalized, 214 Maple Ridge Lane. Attached was a copy of the deed. The house officially belonged to Emily Harper. I stared at the document for a long time before closing my laptop. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt light. Losing that house wasn't losing home. It was losing the illusion of fairness I'd been clinging to my entire life. 2 months passed before I heard from any of them again. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting immediately. I almost didn't open it. Dear Claire, we miss you. Things haven't been the same without you here. Emily's been struggling to keep up with the house payments and maintenance. She's thinking of selling. We hope you'll come visit, it doesn't feel right without you. I read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. There was no anger anymore. Just a quiet kind of sadness, and a strange sense of peace. They had made their choices. And now they were living with them. Ava convinced me to take a trip soon after, a cleanse, she called it. We went hiking in Colorado, surrounded by pine forests and silent skies. Somewhere on that trail, between the smell of damp earth and the distant cry of hawks, I realized something profound. I had spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of love that was already conditional. And now, I didn't want their approval. I wanted my freedom. When we got back, I started journaling again. At first, it was just a vent, but soon, it became a story. A story about the girl who paid for her family's peace until she realized peace wasn't hers to buy. Ava read one entry and looked up at me with wide eyes. Claire, this is powerful. You need to share it. I hesitated. Who'd want to read about a broken family? Everyone, she said. Because everyone's been the responsible one at some point. So I did. I wrote about it all, the house, the debt, the favoritism, the heartbreak. I didn't name names, but I wrote with honesty. I posted the story on a blog one evening, not expecting much. The next morning, there were hundreds of comments. Then thousands. People shared their own stories, the siblings who took advantage, the parents who played favorites, the invisible daughters who held everything together. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. One comment stood out. You didn't lose your home, Claire. You reclaimed yourself. That's the truest kind of inheritance. I cried reading that. Not out of sadness, but recognition. They were right. The house, the money, the apologies, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had finally stopped carrying everyone else's mistakes like they were my own. The next time Mom called, her voice was softer. Claire, your father isn't well. Emily's been trying to handle things, but she's overwhelmed. Could you come home? Home. I thought about that word for a long time. Then I said, Mom, I'll visit. But that house isn't my home anymore. There was a pause. I understand, she whispered. I'm sorry, sweetheart. For everything. It was the first time she'd ever said those words to me. And somehow, that apology, late as it was, meant more than any house ever could. When my mom called that day, I didn't answer right away. I stared at my phone until it stopped ringing, then played her voicemail later, in the quiet. Her voice was trembling. Claire, your father's been in and out of the hospital. Nothing too serious, but he's weak. Emily's struggling. She can't keep up with the house. We need to talk. I listened twice. The first time, all I felt was exhaustion. The second time, something softer, compassion, maybe. I hadn't spoken to them properly in nearly 6 months. I thought I'd buried that chapter for good. But there's something about family that never quite dies, even when you've walked away. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. My apartment was small but mine, every picture, every plant, every piece of furniture chosen by me. It wasn't the house I grew up in, but it was peace. Still, something inside me stirred. I wasn't sure if it was guilt, nostalgia, or the quiet pull of unfinished business. I called Ava. Do I go? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Yes, but on your terms this time. You don't owe them a rescue. You go to say what you need to say. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. No fixing, no rescuing. Just clarity. A week later, I drove back to Maple Ridge Lane. The street was just as I remembered, lined with maple trees whose leaves now blazed gold and crimson. It was late autumn, the kind of day that smelled like wood smoke and endings. When I pulled into the driveway, I barely recognized the house. The shutters were chipped, the garden overgrown. It looked tired. Just like the people inside, I thought. Emily opened the door. Her once bright smile faltered when she saw me. "You came." "Mom called," I said simply. She stepped aside to let me in. "I didn't think you would." I almost didn't. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lavender. My mother sat on the couch, her eyes red-rimmed. Dad was asleep in his recliner, a blanket over his knees. His hair looked thinner. His face, smaller somehow. "Claire," Mom whispered. "It's so good to see you." I stood in the doorway, clutching my bag. "How is he?" "Better," she said. "But the doctor says he needs rest. And, things have been hard." I glanced around. "I can see that." Emily sank into a chair. "I tried to handle it, but the house, it's too much. I didn't realize how much work it takes. Or how expensive it is." I bit back a bitter laugh. "Welcome to adulthood." Her eyes met mine, full of remorse. "I'm sorry, Claire. Really. I thought getting the house would make me feel grounded. Like I finally had something that was mine. But it just reminded me how much I wasn't ready." For the first time, I believed her. We sat in silence for a long while. Dad stirred, opening one eye. When he saw me, a faint smile spread across his face. "Claire Bear," he said weakly. "You're here." That nickname hit me harder than I expected. "Yeah, Dad. I'm here." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. "Your mom and we messed up. I wanted to protect you both, but I ended up hurting you." Tears filled my eyes. "You could have just told me the truth." "I know," he whispered. "And I wish I had. But you've always been the strong one. We leaned on you too much. We forgot you needed care, too." Mom began crying quietly. "We thought we were keeping the peace. But we just pushed you away." For years, I had imagined this moment, what I'd say, how I'd yell, what justice might sound like. But now, standing there, all I felt was release. "I forgive you," I said softly. "But I can't go back to who I was. I've built something new now." Mom nodded through her tears. "You don't have to. We just want to know you still see us." "I do," I said. "But from a distance that's healthy, for me." After a few hours, I went for a walk alone. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp. As I passed the old park where Emily and I used to play, I saw a couple of kids building a leaf pile, laughing as they jumped in. That sound, pure, carefree laughter, hit something deep in me. I used to think happiness came from being needed. Now I knew it came from being free. That night, Emily knocked on the guest room door. "Can I come in?" "Sure." She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. "Mom and Dad told me you wrote about all this. About us." I froze. "They read my blog?" "Yeah," she said quietly. "They didn't say much, but it made them realize how much they took you for granted." I exhaled. "That wasn't my goal." "I know. But I read it too." She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. It hurt. But it also helped me see myself clearly. "I always envied you, Claire. I thought you had everything figured out. I never realized you were carrying all of us." I swallowed hard. I didn't realize it either, until I stopped. She smiled faintly. "I'm thinking of selling the house." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yeah. It's not home anymore. It's just a reminder of all the wrong choices we made." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we both move on." 2 months later, the house sold. Emily moved to Portland with her boyfriend. My parents downsized into a small apartment closer to my city. And me? I finally signed a lease on a place I truly loved, sunlit, airy, with hardwood floors and a balcony that overlooked the river. The first night there, I stood by the window, listening to the hum of traffic and distant laughter. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered, "This is home." It wasn't about bricks or walls or shared history. It was about peace, the kind you build with your own 2 hands. Weeks later, Ava called with excitement in her voice. "You sitting down?" "Why?" I laughed. "Because you just went viral again." "What?" She sent me a link. It was a clip from a podcast called Women Who Rise. They'd read an excerpt from my latest post titled, "The Price of Being the Responsible One." The host's voice echoed through my speakers. "Claire Reynolds reminds us that sometimes, forgiveness isn't about letting them back in, it's about letting yourself move on." The comments were overflowing. People shared how they'd set boundaries, walked away from toxic family expectations, and started living for themselves. A few days later, the host reached out to invite me for a full interview. Sitting in that podcast studio felt surreal. The lights were warm, the microphone gleaming silver. The host smiled. "Claire, your story has touched millions. What made you finally share it publicly?" I took a deep breath. For most of my life, I thought love meant sacrifice. That if I gave enough, worked hard enough, I'd earn my family's approval. But love built on conditions isn't love, it's control. I shared my story because I know women are listening right now who feel the same way. And they deserve to know, walking away isn't betrayal. It's survival. The host nodded. That's powerful. What would you say to your younger self, standing in that old house, before everything fell apart? I smiled sadly. I'd tell her, you were never asking for too much, you were just asking the wrong people. The studio fell silent. The sound tech even stopped typing. When the episode aired, it exploded across social media. Clips of my words, raw and unfiltered, spread everywhere. I got emails from women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, telling me they'd finally drawn their own lines. Some had forgiven. Some had walked away. All had found a piece of freedom. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance I'd been searching for, not the house, not the approval, but the strength to define my worth. A week later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a familiar piece of paper, creased, old, and torn along one edge. It was the original property transfer document, the one that had made Emily the owner of the house. But this time, written across the top in black ink were 2 words, void. Return to sender. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled. It wasn't an apology. It was acknowledgement, a quiet symbol that my parents finally understood. They'd taken something that wasn't theirs to take, but in the end, they'd given me something greater, freedom from their expectations. That weekend, I stood on stage at a local women's conference, invited after the podcast went viral. Rows of faces looked up at me, eyes full of recognition. My story started with a house, I began. But what I really lost, and later found, was my sense of home. Home isn't a place. It's a piece you build when you stop needing to prove your worth. Applause filled the room. Some women were crying. Others just nodded with quiet smiles. After the talk, a young woman approached me. My mom gave my brother everything. I thought I'd spend my whole life angry. But your story, her voice broke, it helped me see I can forgive without forgetting. I squeezed her hand. That's the kind of healing that changes everything. Later that night, I looked out over the city skyline again, the same view that had once felt lonely now looked like freedom. I thought about my parents, about Emily, about the house I'd once called home. And for the first time, the thought didn't sting. Sometimes, losing what you thought was yours is how you make space for what truly is. And I had found it, peace, purpose, and the quiet, steady strength of finally belonging to myself. Thanks for watching HerFlare, stories of heartbreak, boundaries, and healing. Subscribe to join thousands of women redefining strength, one story at a time.